All right, ready to dive in. Today we're looking at something really interesting.
Yeah.
Leo Tolstoy's A Calendar of Wisdom. Now, you probably know Tolstoy from his novels like War and Peace.
Yeah, Anna Karenina.
Exactly. Big epic stories.
Huge.
But A Calendar of Wisdom, this is a different kind of journey.
It is different.
So imagine like a collection of wisdom curated over years.
Okay.
Not just Tolstoy's own thoughts, but insights from thinkers across history.
Wow.
Different cultures, different backgrounds, almost like we have a direct line
Oh, that's cool.
to all these great minds all at once.
I like that. It really is fascinating.
Mhm.
Tolstoy wasn't just trying to
Yeah.
put together, a book of quotes.
Yeah.
He wanted to distill the wisdom of the centuries
Mm-hmm.
into a guide for daily living.
That's a big goal.
It is. And he spent over 15 years on this project.
15 years.
Yeah, poring over texts,
Right.
refining his selections
Oh.
through 3 different editions.
So you're telling me he was dedicated?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't take on something like that unless you're really passionate about it.
Yeah, and speaking of passion, there's this diary entry where Tolstoy talks about how working on the book made him feel so uplifted.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really positive. What do you think it was about this specific project that just resonated so much with him?
Well, you have to remember the context.
Mhm.
He was going through some intense spiritual searching later in life.
Right. This is the same Tolstoy.
Exactly. Who wrote those huge novels,
Yeah.
grappling with the meaning of life.
Hmm.
And I think A Calendar of Wisdom
Okay.
was like his way of making those big questions
Yeah.
more practical. Something people could actually use day to day.
So almost like he was trying to connect those big philosophical ideas to the challenges of just being human.
Absolutely.
And he did it in a really unique format. In the second edition of the book,
Right.
he organized all these thoughts by theme,
Okay.
grouping them by day by week and even by month.
It's like he was creating a blueprint for reflection. A way to start each day with a little wisdom
Yeah.
from these incredible minds throughout history. And what's really cool is that Tolstoy included
Okay.
like 800 of his own thoughts.
Wow. So it's not just a collection of quotes then.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
You're getting Tolstoy's take on things, too. He often frames each day with his own reflections.
So we're getting these other voices, but also Tolstoy's evolving understanding.
Precisely. Like having a conversation with him across time.
I like that.
Yeah.
Now, one of the big themes that comes up right away is faith
Okay.
and how it relates to finding meaning in life.
Right. From the very beginning.
Yeah.
On January 2nd, Tolstoy jumps right in.
Okay.
He calls out what he sees as a prejudice, this idea that you can live a good life without faith. He argues that we can't truly live well
Okay.
until we understand where we came from and why we're here.
Right, like our purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He even includes this quote from Ewald Flugel.
Okay.
It says, the life of a person without faith is the life of an animal.
Wow, that's pretty direct.
It is. And it sets the stage for how Tolstoy saw religion fitting into all of this.
Right. So for him, was religion about like dogma or rules?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
It was more about having a framework
Okay.
for thinking about those big questions.
Yeah. The why are we here?
Exactly. What does it all mean type of stuff.
So for someone listening who maybe isn't religious in the traditional sense,
Yeah.
how could we interpret this focus on faith in a more secular way?
I think it's about acknowledging that some things in life
Okay.
go beyond logic and the material world.
Like a sense of wonder.
Exactly. Awe. Recognizing there are forces at play bigger than us.
That makes sense.
It's about finding something that grounds you, give you purpose
Yeah,
in a world that can feel pretty chaotic.
definitely. And speaking of finding purpose, another big theme in A Calendar of Wisdom is love kindness, self-sacrifice.
Stay topics.
Tolstoy was really into this idea of loving your enemies. He even includes a Chinese proverb. If you can teach a person kindness and love, but you do not, you lose a brother.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
But how practical is that, really?
Yeah, I mean, in today's world,
It's tough.
loving your enemies, it can feel impossible.
It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
Especially now with everything so divided.
Right.
But I think Tolstoy is getting at something deeper than just,
Okay.
feeling warm and fuzzy towards people who oppose you.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that shared humanity.
Even with people we disagree with.
Exactly. Even when it's hard. Even with those we see as different or threatening.
So choosing to see that human connection.
Yes. And Tolstoy believed this was key for society to improve. He argued that real progress
Okay.
comes from individuals making sacrifices.
Yep. Interesting. And this wasn't just theoretical for him either.
No way. Remember, Tolstoy was all about social justice in his own life.
Oh, right. He gave away most of what he owned.
Exactly. And advocated for some pretty big social changes.
Wow. That
Yeah.
makes me think about his views on work. It wasn't just about earning money for him. He talks about finding joy and rest.
After you've worked hard.
Yeah, after honest labor. He even tells this story about a Chinese man.
Oh, tell me this one.
So this man, he wasn't impressed with all of Europe's focus on mechanized labor.
Interesting.
And he says something like, physical work is good. Being relieved from physical work will be an enormous disaster.
What do you think Tolstoy was trying to with that?
Well, he uses this story to critique excessive wealth. Basically, he's saying that a truly kind person can't be rich. He ties this back to simple living, limiting your desires.
So there's tension there.
Yeah, between getting rich and actually living ethically.
Right. Like he's questioning that whole idea that material success is the ultimate goal.
Exactly. And this connects to another big theme he explores,
Which is
death and eternity. Tolstoy was fascinated by how people, even though they know death is inevitable, they live as if it'll never happen.
We try not to think about it.
Yeah, it's like we're avoiding it.
He talks about two ways of being: living without thinking about death at all,
Right.
and living with the awareness that it's coming.
Okay.
On February 2nd, he says, the more we shift from the material to the spiritual, the less we fear death.
Makes you think about priorities.
It does. He even uses this really powerful analogy of a man who's been condemned,
Oh, wow.
right? He doesn't care about possessions anymore because he's facing his own mortality,
Makes sense.
but he wants to make amends,
Yeah.
do good in his final moments.
It's a strong image.
It is.
Yeah.
And for Tolstoy, it gets at the heart of what a meaningful life really means.
Interesting.
He believed there's something within us,
Okay.
in the soul, that goes beyond death.
Like death isn't the end.
Right. A transition to something else.
A comforting thought. Now, it's important to remember this calendar of wisdom. It's not just quotes from others.
Right.
Tolstoy's own thoughts are woven throughout the whole thing.
It adds another layer.
Exactly. One that really stood out to me was this line: the only real science is the knowledge of how a person should live his life. And this knowledge is open to everyone.
It's like he's democratizing wisdom.
Right. Like you don't need to be a scholar or philosopher to find it.
Exactly. Anyone who seeks it can find it.
Another one that resonated with me was, the same divine beginning lives in all people, and no single person or gathering of people has the right to destroy this connection between the divine beginning and a human body. That is, to take a human life.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, he's against violence.
Clearly.
Highlighting how sacred life is. And, he wrote this long before pacifism became a big movement.
He was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. Speaking of that, he also had some thoughts about our relationship with animals.
Oh, interesting. What did he say?
He wrote, "It is a mistake to believe that we need obey no moral in our attitude to the animals, that we have no moral responsibilities to them. This way lies complete vulgarity and rudeness."
That's relevant even today.
It is, with all the conversations about animal welfare.
It makes you wonder what Tolstoy would think
I know.
about the world now, all the technology,
Consumerism.
global connections.
It's hard to say for sure,
Right.
but based on what we see in a calendar of wisdom,
Yeah,
I think it's safe to say he'd have some strong opinions.
probably.
Yeah.
He definitely wasn't afraid to speak his mind.
Not at all. But one thing's for sure.
What's that?
His ideas about being human, the search for meaning, living a life of purpose, they're just as relevant now as they were over 100 years ago.
So as we continue this dive into a calendar of wisdom, let's see how his ideas speak to our own lives and the challenges we face in the 21st century.
You know, one thing that really jumps out at me about Tolstoy's work is his focus on truth.
Okay.
He wasn't just into like the philosophical ideas.
Right.
He wanted to know how truth could be applied to everyday life.
You're right. It wasn't enough to just know something.
Right.
He had to live it.
Exactly. And you see that in a calendar of wisdom.
Yep.
On May 15th, he says this: "Truthfulness is the only real currency which circulates everywhere."
It's like honesty and integrity are the most valuable things.
Yeah. No matter your culture, your social status. That's what matters.
Makes you think about how often we compromise our values.
It does.
Yeah.
for convenience or to get ahead.
Tolstoy's saying true fulfillment comes from living by your convictions.
Absolutely. He was really critical of just blindly following tradition
Okay.
or accepting things because someone in authority said so.
Right.
He thought we should use our own minds, question what we're told.
Find the truth for ourselves.
Exactly. And this reminds me of something else he wrote.
Oh, what's that?
Divine truth may be revealed in the speech of children, or in the ravings and nightmares of madmen, or in the ordinary conversations of simple people. And weak and false thoughts may be found in books which have come to be considered great or even sacred.
So truth can come from anywhere.
Right. It could be in the most unexpected places.
And we shouldn't blindly accept things just because they're from a respected source.
Exactly. Challenge yourself to be open-minded.
Look for wisdom in unusual places.
Yeah. Question everything, even the things we think are sacred.
For Tolstoy, it sounds like learning wasn't just about filling your head with facts.
No, it was a spiritual practice.
Okay.
True knowledge should make you more compassionate.
And lead to a better life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about using knowledge to become wiser, not just knowing more stuff.
That makes me wonder, in our world now, with so much information everywhere,
It's overwhelming.
how do we know what's actually valuable?
That's the big question. How do we apply Tolstoy's ideas
Yeah.
when we're bombarded with so many different viewpoints and ideologies?
It can be tough to sort through it all.
I think Tolstoy would say it's about developing discernment,
Okay.
learning to think critically, aligning yourself with sources that match your values.
So being more selective about what we consume.
Exactly. He believed that our intellect and our spirituality are connected.
Interesting.
Our intellect can show us the way, but it's our spirit that guides us to truth and meaning.
On June 26th, he says, "Love provides a person with the purpose of his life. Intellect shows him the means to achieve that purpose."
Love's the compass, intellect's the map,
I like that. You need both.
to navigate life. He also has this awesome metaphor for the soul.
Oh, tell me about it.
On November 27th, he describes it as a transparent ball, which is lit from the inside with its own light. This flame is not only the source of all light and truth, but it illuminates everything around you.
We all have that inner light.
And when we cultivate
It
it,
shines outward.
exactly, this
right?
connects to his emphasis on self-knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
He thought it was essential for understanding ourselves.
And our connection to something bigger.
Right. On April 22nd, he says, "The greatest knowledge is self-knowledge. He who understands himself will understand God."
So looking inward is just as important as looking outward.
Absolutely. He believed real happiness doesn't come from outside circumstances.
Okay.
It comes from aligning with your spiritual purpose.
He wasn't a fan of material possessions then.
Not really. On May 23rd, he writes, "The growth of your desires is not the way to perfection, as many people think.
Yeah.
To the contrary, the more a person limits himself, the better he can understand his human dignity, and the more free, the more brave he becomes, and most importantly, the more capable of serving God and other people."
Less is more.
Exactly. Contentment comes from wanting less, not having more.
And that brings us to his critique of social injustice.
Right. The problems with materialism.
On January 26, he makes this bold statement: "A rich man cannot be merciful. If he becomes really merciful, he will quickly lose his riches."
So there's this conflict.
Between wealth and compassion.
He felt that getting rich often means taking from others,
Yeah.
and true kindness means letting go of material things. He even says that with the same hand that we rob one person, we reward another.
Wow. So he's calling out the hypocrisy of charity that comes from exploiting others.
Exactly. He was a huge advocate for social justice.
And believed that true happiness comes from a simple life.
Right? Aligned with your values. On August 19th, he writes, "People can live without need and without jealousy only when they lead a life of moderation.
It's about finding that balance.
Contentment, not excess." And he reinforces this on September 12th. "For those who live a spiritual life, wealth is not only unnecessary but uncomfortable. It stops the development of one's real life,
Like material things are holding you back.
distracting you from what truly matters."
Simplifying your life, focusing on what's important.
Exactly. And that leads us to another critical part of Tolstoy's thinking,
What's that?
his stance against war and violence.
Tolstoy was a pacifist.
Absolutely. He believed all war is immoral.
That violence is never the answer.
He saw it as a failure of our humanity.
On April 8th, he says this: "People think that if they call mass murder war, then mass murder will stop being a murder, a crime."
He cuts right through the language.
Reminds us that war is about taking human life.
No matter what we call it.
Huh.
And he doesn't just condemn war in general. He gets specific. On July 6th, He shares this chilling account from the Russo-Japanese War,
Oh, wow.
describes the battlefield, the toll it takes,
The human cost of war.
shattered bodies, broken lives.
It's a stark reminder of the consequences.
Tolstoy believed true strength isn't about military might.
Okay.
It's about love and compassion,
Violence is a weakness.
a failure to embrace our better nature. On August 13th, he says, without faith in God, you can force people to act, but you cannot convince them you can become a tyrant, but not a teacher.
Violence might control people.
But it can't change hearts and minds.
Real change comes from understanding.
Persuasion, not force to orate. Tolstoy was calling for a different way to approach conflict,
Okay.
moving away from dominance and coercion,
Towards dialogue and empathy.
working together to find peaceful solutions. His ideas about war and peace feel so relevant today, with all the conflict in the world.
Definitely. It makes you wonder what he would say.
About the state of things now,
It's hard to know for sure.
but based on a calendar of wisdom, I think he'd be concerned by the lack of compassion,
But maybe also hopeful.
about the movements for peace and justice.
And for protecting the environment.
It seems Tolstoy's message,
Of love, nonviolence, simple living.
it still resonates with people.
Across cultures and generations.
And as we continue our deep dive,
Let's see how his ideas can inform our lives.
and the choices we make in the 21st century.
As we get further into A Calendar of Wisdom, I'm really struck by how much Tolstoy talks about self-discipline.
It's a recurring theme.
He really seemed to believe that it was essential for spiritual growth.
Absolutely. For living a meaningful life. On February 6th, he says something pretty interesting.
Okay.
Very often, people are made proud by their control over their own desires and by the force and passion with which they master them. What a strange delusion.
What do you think he means by that?
I think it's about recognizing that true self-mastery. It's not about suppressing your desires with force.
Okay.
It's about understanding them.
Recognizing that they're fleeting.
Exactly. And choosing to act based on your values instead.
So it's about making conscious choices.
Yes, not just reacting to every impulse.
That's so relevant today.
It is. We're constantly bombarded with temptation.
Instant gratification everywhere.
Tolstoy seems to be saying that real satisfaction comes from delaying that gratification.
Choosing long-term growth over short-term pleasure.
He gives us a great analogy on March 29th to illustrate this.
Oh, tell me about it.
He says, a good groom does not drop his reins when he cannot stop his horses at once, but tries again to pull the reins, and eventually the horses stop.
So it's about persistence.
Right. Self-discipline is a process.
You might not get it right away.
You might stumble, you might fall, but you keep trying,
You keep practicing.
and eventually you gain more control.
It's encouraging to think about.
It is. Even Tolstoy, someone who clearly struggled with his own desires, he believed we could master ourselves.
Through dedication and effort.
And speaking of overcoming internal struggles, Tolstoy also talks a lot about forgiveness.
That's a big one. He has this really insightful line on July 30th.
What is it?
The man who cannot forgive destroys a bridge which he will have to cross because every person needs forgiveness.
Wow. So powerful.
Mm-hmm.
We all make mistakes.
We all need forgiveness at some point.
Holding on to anger and resentment.
It just hurts us in the end.
Forgiveness isn't about condoning someone's actions.
Okay.
It's about letting go of that negativity.
So we can move on.
With peace and compassion.
Forgiveness is a gift to ourselves.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on Tolstoy's view of happiness?
I know it's a big topic for him. He didn't see happiness as just a fleeting feeling.
Right.
It was more about aligning with your spiritual purpose.
A state of being. On May 2nd, he says, real happiness can be built only by harmonizing your life with the will of God.
So true happiness comes from something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah. Surrendering our ego.
Aligning with something greater.
Recognizing we're part of a larger whole.
It's a beautiful idea, finding joy and contributing to something bigger.
He reinforces this on August 17th. The only way to know God and to believe in eternity is to unite your own will with the will of God.
Surrender to something beyond ourselves.
It's a theme he returns to again and again. He contrasts this with a different view of happiness on November 15th.
What does he say?
The heart of a person whose major treasure is wealth is buried in filth.
Material possessions won't bring true happiness.
They can even be a burden.
A distraction from what really matters.
Tolstoy believed happiness is about cultivating your inner world.
And living by your values.
Now, as we wrap up our deep dive into A calendar of wisdom.
Yeah.
I think it's important to talk about Tolstoy's thoughts on prayer.
He had some specific ideas about what prayer is and isn't. On February 25th, he offers this definition: to accept and to remember the laws of the limitless being, God, and to measure all your deeds, past, present, and future, according to his laws.
It's less about asking for things,
More about aligning yourself with the divine will,
cultivating gratitude,
reflecting on your actions,
seeking guidance.
living by your principles. And he talks about the importance of sincerity and focus in prayer.
Being present in the moment. On August 20th, he writes, "The most necessary and most difficult form of prayer is to remember about your duties to God amidst the distractions of everyday life."
So prayer isn't just something you do at a certain time or place,
It can be a constant state of awareness,
an ongoing conversation with the divine.
woven into your everyday life.
Tolstoy also emphasizes living in the present moment. He reminds us on November 18th that there is no past and no future. No one has ever entered those two imaginary kingdoms. There is only the present.
Let go of regrets and anxieties,
Focus on the now.
the only moment you have control over. He even gives some practical advice for dealing with tough emotions. On November 19th, he says,
Let's hear it.
"If you have difficult times, if you suffer from the loss of loved ones or from fears about the future, remember that life exists only in the present and direct all your thoughts and memories to this present. All your anguish about the past and your worries about the future will disappear, and you will feel freedom and happiness."
Our thoughts shape our reality.
Focusing on the present can free us from suffering.
Speaking of suffering, Tolstoy had a unique perspective on its role in our lives. On April 19th, he writes, "A person who does not understand the benefit of suffering does not live a clever and true life."
He saw suffering as inevitable.
But also as a source of growth.
It can push us to confront our limitations,
They become more resilient.
to deepen our compassion.
He even says on June 12th, sufferings, all kinds of sufferings, are always good for us.
It's a challenging idea.
But maybe he's saying that even in pain,
There's an opportunity for transformation.
for understanding life more deeply,
Our struggles can be our greatest teachers.
if we're open to learning from them.
And finally, I want to highlight Tolstoy's belief in service to others,
He saw that as the true purpose of life,
not pursuing selfish desires.
but dedicating ourselves to the well-being of others. He writes beautifully about this on April 20th.
What does he say?
For a person who leads a spiritual life, self-sacrifice brings a bliss that far transcends the pleasure of a person who lives by the self-indulgent satisfaction of his animal passions,
True happiness comes from giving,
transcending our ego.
focusing on the needs of others.
He reminds us on August 16th that all people have the same origin, are bound by the same law, and were created for the same purpose.
We're all connected.
We have a responsibility to care for one another. And on September 20th, he offers this thought: good things, once done, will never disappear, even if you forget about them. There is only one way to be happy, and this is a sure way: to do goodness and to share this goodness with others.
Acts of kindness create a ripple effect,
They make a difference in the world.
a difference that goes beyond ourselves.
Tolstoy's call to service is a challenge
To move beyond our self-centeredness,
to find a wider purpose.
to find meaning in helping others.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into A Calendar of Wisdom, what are your final thoughts?
Tolstoy was a complex person, but his wisdom is undeniable. This book, it's full of insights that can challenge us, inspire us, guide us on our own journeys. His reflections on faith, love, simplicity, self-disciplined service to others,
It's a timeless roadmap.
for navigating life.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is that even though he wrote this over a century ago,
His words still feel so relevant today.
in a world that's often focused on material things,
And where there's so much division,
Tolstoy's message of love, compassion, and finding meaning.
it's more important than ever.
He reminds us that true happiness isn't about having more,
It's about wanting less,
simplifying your life,
focusing on what truly matters.
dedicating yourself to something bigger,
He challenges us to be active in our lives,
to cultivate our inner self,
to approach the world with kindness and compassion.
and to try to make a positive difference.
So as we finish up here,
Yeah.
I encourage you to go back